I'm now 31 years old, but this story takes me back to 2014 when I was 26. At that time, my ex-fiancée was 23. I had just finished my 4-year stint in the military. The journey started 3 years earlier when I returned home to take time off. Back then, she worked as a horse trainer and did some odd jobs on the side because training horses wasn't a high-paying gig. We met during my days off, and despite the odds of distance, we decided to give a long-distance relationship a shot. I had this plan. I would help pay for her apartment rent, which would become our home base whenever I came back. It was a commitment, a promise I made. We started dating, and I vowed to marry her once my military service concluded. During my time in the military, I took on a role that felt natural to me. I contributed to half of her rent and also chipped in for half of her car payments. In my traditional mindset, I believed in taking care of my own, and she had become a significant part of that equation. It was more than just financial support. It was a way of expressing my commitment and love. Neither of our parents were well off financially, but she was close to her family. She often traveled to the countryside where they lived, and this partly explained why she didn't have a well-paying job. She sought something that would allow flexibility with her time. Her family was tight-knit, consisting of a younger sister and 2 younger brothers. After I finished my military service as a gesture of gratitude for her patience and faithfulness, I bought her a $7,000 engagement ring. It was a token of appreciation for waiting for me while I served. However, things started to feel different when I moved in with her after leaving the military. I began to notice some odd behaviors. Firstly, she seemed constantly engrossed in her phone, texting someone. Additionally, she insisted on making frequent trips to her parents' place, staying there for at least 2 days every week. This struck me as peculiar. To complicate matters, she regularly used the car that I had helped pay for, leaving me without transportation. I found myself having to rely on coworkers for rides. It was a situation that left me feeling uneasy and questioning what might be going on. The troubles arising from these issues began to strain our relationship, making me question how well I really knew her. It seemed like the person she showed me during my brief visits after returning from the military was only a fraction of who she truly was. Despite meeting her parents a few times, she hesitated whenever I suggested joining her on visits to their countryside home. This reluctance, coupled with her frequent phone use and the extended stays at her parents' place, fueled my growing unease. As I pondered these concerns, it became clear that something wasn't right. It seemed possible that she either didn't care for me as much as I believed and was merely using me, or there was another layer to her life that I wasn't privy to. It turned out to be a painful truth. She was doing both. The issue with the car further highlighted the growing problems. Even though I had contributed significantly to the car payments, it was registered in her name. The situation escalated when she insisted on using the car alone, showing little consideration for the fact that I didn't have a vehicle of my own yet. This discrepancy added to the mounting evidence that our relationship was not as solid as I had hoped. I was hesitant to take out a loan to buy a car, as I preferred paying in cash. However, she insisted, leaving me with no choice but to get a car loan. This decision did bring some improvement to our situation, providing me with the mobility I needed to continue with my daily activities. One Thanksgiving, we decided to celebrate at her parents' house. They turned out to be warm and welcoming hosts, and I spent quality time with her younger brother, who was 14 years old. They had a room prepared for us, marking the first time I had an extended stay with her family. The Thanksgiving gathering went well, and I felt positive about our relationship. It made me wonder why she wasn't keen on inviting me to see her family more often. That evening, after arriving at her parents' house, I found myself in the room we were sharing. It was her childhood room in her parents' home. Despite the positive atmosphere of the day, little did I know that this night would reveal more about our relationship than I had ever anticipated. It was getting late, and I began to wonder when she would join me in bed. Curiosity led me downstairs to find her, and there, to my surprise, I encountered a man I had never met. He was almost the same age as us, engaged in a conversation with my fiancée, her younger sister, and her youngest brother. She introduced him as Jake, but had never mentioned him before. Oddly, she referred to him as like family. When I joined them, my fiancé seemed uneasy and abruptly suggested we go back upstairs, cutting off the conversation. This sudden change left me with a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Once upstairs, I couldn't shake the unease, so I asked her about Jake's identity. She hesitated before saying he was her cousin. However, her body language betrayed discomfort, and it was clear she wanted to steer away from the topic. The situation left me with more questions than answers, deepening the sense of unease in our relationship. The next morning, while out on a walk with her younger brother, my suspicions lingered. I decided to dig a bit deeper and asked him about the guy, wanting to confirm if he was indeed their cousin. Much to my surprise, he shook his head and revealed that the guy used to date my fiancée back in high school. As her younger brother was quite inquisitive, I used this to my advantage and probed for more details. I asked him why they had broken up, and he shared that the guy had chosen to start dating another person while still in a relationship with my fiancée. It turned out he had cheated on her, and when he found someone else, he broke up with my fiancée and left town. Over the past 3 years, he had faced more challenges, losing his job and breaking up with his new girlfriend, which led him to move back to his parents' house. The revelation painted a different picture of my fiancée's past, and it explained her discomfort the previous night. It was a moment of realization that the person she had introduced as a cousin was, in fact, an ex-boyfriend with a complicated history. This discovery left me grappling with the newfound knowledge and questioning the honesty in our relationship. It all started to make sense now. I began to understand why my fiancée frequently visited her parents. When I questioned her younger brother about her visits, he disclosed that she went almost every week. However, he added that she never slept at her parents' house. Instead, she either stayed at a friend's place or returned home the same day. Knowing that my fiancée typically spent 2 nights when she traveled, it became evident that she was staying over at her so-called cousin's house. After this conversation with her younger brother, I was upset, but I tried not to show it. The realization that she might be cheating on me lingered in my mind. I didn't want to confront her too soon, fearing she might come up with excuses. To gather more information, I took a drastic step. I decided to install a GPS tracker in her car. This way, I could find out where she went the next time she visited her parents. Fast forward to the week of Christmas, I told her a white lie, saying I would spend the holiday with my family. Instead, I watched her movements on the GPS tracker. That evening, she drove to her parents' place, and later, she headed to an unfamiliar location, parking there. The dots were connecting, and the suspicion I had been harboring seemed to be turning into a harsh reality. I followed her to the unfamiliar location where she had parked, and to my surprise, it was on the street where her ex-boyfriend lived. Coincidentally, a Christmas party was in full swing, and many cars, including hers, were parked outside. Despite my hesitations, I took a risk and decided to invite myself to the party. Entering the house, I found myself surrounded by unfamiliar faces, but I managed to blend in. Suddenly, my fiancé and her ex-boyfriend appeared, with his arm around her shoulders and her hand across his waist. Both were wearing matching Christmas sweaters, giving off the appearance of a couple. I didn't mean to create a scene, but the shock of seeing them together overwhelmed me. In a moment of frustration, I confronted her, asking whether he was still her cousin, her ex-boyfriend, or if they were back together. She seemed at a loss for words, stammering that it wasn't what it looked like. As my frustration escalated, a few guys tried to calm me down, but I yelled at them not to touch me. The revelation and the sight of her with her ex-boyfriend left me grappling with a mix of emotions and the painful realization that our relationship was a sham. In the midst of the chaotic scene at the Christmas party, I declared to everyone that she was my fiancée, but now my ex-fiancée. She was visibly embarrassed and tried to retreat into the house. More people intervened, attempting to remove me from the situation, but I continued causing a scene, hurling hurtful words at her and labeling her with derogatory terms. Humiliated, she sought refuge inside the house, beyond my reach. In frustration, I shouted at her to return my ring. As the situation escalated, threats to involve the police were made, prompting me to flee to my car. On the drive home, I attempted to call her, but she refused to answer. When I arrived home, she sent me several text messages denying the affair, but expressing her willingness to break up. She accused me of humiliating her and, in turn, denied any wrongdoing. In response, I texted her demanding the return of the engagement ring. Shockingly, she admitted to having an affair all along, but refused to return the ring. Her rationale was that when she accepted the ring, she intended to marry me and wasn't having an affair at that time. According to her, the ring was a gift, and she felt no obligation to give it back. The revelation left me in horror, realizing that the foundation of our relationship had been built on deception, and the ring that symbolized our commitment had become a contentious point of dispute. Firm in my decision, I told her that unless she returned the ring, she should not expect to come back to the apartment for her belongings. In response, she threatened to involve the police, but I urged her to proceed. Upon returning home, I promptly changed the locks to the apartment. She didn't return until the 2nd of January when I came back from celebrating New Year's at my parents' house. To my dismay, I discovered that she had broken into my apartment, forcibly breaking the locks and taken all her belongings. It was evident she had received assistance, likely from her so-called cousin. The violation left me feeling humiliated and betrayed, especially considering all I had done for her. Despite my anger, I refrained from sending threatening messages or calling her, keeping my emotions hidden. I lacked surveillance cameras to identify who assisted her, but I strongly suspected someone had helped. The two items I deemed most valuable to her were the Ford F-150 truck that I had helped pay off and the $7,000 engagement ring I had purchased. The incident deepened the sense of violation and disillusionment in the aftermath of our tumultuous breakup. In the aftermath of the tumultuous breakup, I found myself consumed by a desire for revenge. I reached out to a military buddy I had served with who happened to own a junkyard. Sharing my situation with him, I laid out my plan. I wanted her car towed, disassembled, and its parts sold. Surprisingly, he agreed to help, and I hatched a plan. Approaching my boss, I requested a shift change to night hours, even though I typically worked during the day. Fortunately, he agreed. While I was at work, my military buddy utilized the GPS tracker still on her car to locate it at her so-called cousin's house. To conceal his tow truck, he stripped it down and removed its license plate. Once he had the car in his possession, it took less than 6 hours to dismantle and extract all its parts, reducing it to a heap of crushed metal. Meanwhile, my ex-fiancée was left bewildered when she couldn't find her car. Desperate, she began to beg me, claiming she knew it was my doing. In a surprising turn, she offered to return the engagement ring in exchange for information about the car's whereabouts. The revenge plan had unfolded, leaving me torn between the satisfaction of payback and the realization of the lengths I had gone to in seeking retribution. Despite her persistent messages, I remained silent and didn't respond. In desperation, she took the matter to the police, filing a report accusing me of stealing her car. The police called me, but I had a solid alibi. I was at work during the alleged incident. They cleared me of any wrongdoing. Even after the police cleared me, she continued to plead with me, attempting to coax an admission of guilt in exchange for returning the engagement ring. I chose not to engage with her. The absence of her car eventually cost her job, as she couldn't make it to work without it. Aware that I followed her on Facebook, she posted a public message, painting me as a spiteful man who had stolen her car. In her message, she fabricated outrageous lies, accusing me of being abusive and claiming I had assaulted her. Despite the false accusations, I maintained my silence, refusing to be drawn into the web of accusations and drama she was creating. The situation had spiraled into a web of deceit, and I remained steadfast in my decision not to respond to her false claims. Eventually, she changed her relationship status back to her ex-boyfriend, and I received the notification on my phone. It felt like a foolish move on her part, especially considering that they broke up again just 6 months later. If she had been loyal to me, perhaps we could have moved forward and gotten married. However, life took its course and I met another girl. We connected, got married, and this time, I didn't invest in an expensive ring. I made it clear to her that if she cared more about showing off the ring than our relationship, she could show herself out. Fortunately, she understood my perspective, and we built our relationship on trust and understanding. As for the car revenge plan, after my military buddy sold the car for parts, I ended up with about $5,000, and he kept the rest. It wasn't the same as the hard-earned $7,000 I had spent on the engagement ring, but I learned to live with the outcome. Life moved on, and I found happiness in a new relationship that was built on genuine connection and